I spent 30 years building something I loved, and I didn't notice the crack until it was too late. Not in the wood, in me. The advice that was supposed to save me, do what you love, turned out to have a structural flaw. My name is Walter. I am 79. And I need to show you what I miss before you build your life on it. When I was young, 22, 23, I loved working with wood, not as a hobby, not as something I did on weekends to relax. It was deeper than that. There was a quality to the work that I've never been able to fully describe, though I've tried many times. It was a kind of silence, not the absence of noise. My father's garage was loud, the saw was loud, the planer was loud. But there was a silence inside, a narrowing. When I was shaping a tenon or fitting a joint, the rest of the world would step back. The worrying, the planning, the second-guessing, all of it would go quiet. And what was left was just the wood, my hands, and a conversation between the two that didn't need language. Quartersawn, white oak, dovetailed corners. It took me 3 months because I was doing it after work, evenings, and weekends. When I brought it into the house, he ran his hand along the top edge and didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "This is better than anything you could buy." That was when my uncle first said it. "You are wasting this talent sitting in an insurance office. You should do this for a living." And the idea landed like a key turning in a lock, of course. Why hadn't I seen it? Why would anyone spend 40 years behind a desk when they could spend those years doing the thing that made the noise stop? So I quit. I rented a small workshop behind a tire shop on Greenfield Avenue. I started taking custom orders, and for 2 years, maybe 3, it felt like I had solved life, like I had found the answer that most people search for and never find. But here is what I didn't understand then. And this is the part that took me more than a decade to see clearly. When I worked with wood in my father's garage, the only parties in the conversation were me and the material. There was no client, no deadline, no price. No, can you make it 2 inches shorter because it won't fit under the window? The love I felt was pure because it was free. It had no obligation attached to it, no transaction surrounding it. It existed entirely on its own terms. The moment I turned that love into a business, I introduced a third party into the conversation. And the market doesn't care what you love. The market cares what it wants, and it will reshape your love to fit its needs without asking permission. The first compromise was a dining table, a woman named Sandra. Walnut, 8 feet long, seats 8, delivered in 3 weeks. I wanted to build it with hand-cut mortise and tenon joints. That is what I loved. That is what made the work feel like mine. But hand-cut joints on a table that size would take 6 weeks. So I used dowels, strong enough, looked fine. Sandra was happy. She never knew the difference. I told myself it was one compromise. Everyone makes compromises. That is maturity. But here is what nobody tells you about compromises. They don't arrive as a single, large decision you can see coming. They arrive as a long series of small ones, and each one is so minor, so reasonable, so easy to justify. You adjust an inch here, an inch there, and then one morning you measure the distance between where you started and where you are, and it is not inches, it is miles. Within 4 years, I was building what clients wanted, on their schedules, within their budgets. I was running a service business. The material was wood, the work involved my hands. But the silence, that internal silence, the narrowing, the private conversation, it was gone, replaced by project management and client revisions and supply chain delays and a constant low-grade anxiety about whether the next... And here is what made it worse. I couldn't say any of this out loud, because I had built my entire identity around this decision. I was Walter the woodworker. I had told my family I was following my passion. I had told my friends. I had told my friends. I had told myself. It was my story. And once something becomes your story, questioning it feels like questioning yourself. If the work wasn't fulfilling, that meant I was the problem. I wasn't committed enough. I wasn't grateful enough. I wasn't talented enough. The advice couldn't be wrong. It was too popular, too universal, too celebrated to be wrong. I did what people do when they're trapped in a story they can't exit. I performed, I told people I loved it. I talked about new projects with enthusiasm. I didn't feel. I said things like, I can't believe I get paid to do this. And none of it was entirely a lie. That is what made it so hard to challenge. You can't break out of something that is half true. But this isn't really a story about woodworking, and this isn't really about me. This is about a thinking error with a specific shape. I see it in 25-year-olds choosing a major. I see it in 40-year-olds afraid to leave a career they've outgrown. I see it in 60-year-olds wondering why the thing they committed their life to doesn't feel like anything anymore. And the error is always the same. It has a structure. Once you see it, you'll recognize it in commencement speeches and advice columns and well-meaning conversations with people who have never tested the advice they're giving. If you are starting to recognize this shape in your own decisions, stay with me, a part that explains why it happens. By year 8, something shifted inside me. I didn't have language for it then. I do now. I didn't hate the work. I want to be precise about that. Hate is clean. Hate gives you a direction away from the thing. I would finish a piece, a sideboard, a bed frame, a set of chairs that I could point to and say, objectively, that the craftsmanship was sound, and I would feel no response, not pride, not frustration, not satisfaction, not even relief, just a flat, grey blankness, like reaching for something in a dark room and finding the room is empty. The love was gone, and it hadn't left suddenly. It had been draining out for years, so slowly I didn't notice the level dropping until the reservoir was dry. This is the part that most people skip when they talk about passion, so I need you to hear it clearly. Passion is not a permanent state. It is your nervous system saying, this matters, pay attention, go deeper here. It is a flare, not a furnace. And like any signal, it can be overloaded if you force it to fire every day. If you strap it to a schedule, chain it to a mortgage, make it perform on command for 8 years straight, it doesn't get stronger. It goes quiet, like a nerve that has been compressed. So long it goes numb. That is not a metaphor. That is the mechanism. I had taken the signal, the love, the silence, the focus, and I had pressed on it so hard, for so long, under so much external pressure, that it stopped transmitting altogether. And now, the geometry of the trap became visible. If I quit, I was admitting failure, not just professional failure, identity failure. I had staked my sense of self on this choice. Walking away didn't mean changing jobs. It meant not knowing who I was. If I stayed, I was performing passion for a living, building things I didn't care about for people I would never see again. Every exit was a loss. That is how you know you are in a real trap, not that you can't leave, that every direction out costs something you are not sure you can afford. You are probably thinking, this is where I had the breakthrough, the moment of clarity, the dramatic realization that changed everything. I didn't. Not yet. My wife, Eleanor, said something one evening. I was sitting at the kitchen table, not eating, just sitting. She looked at me, not with pity, not with frustration, but with a kind of clear seeing that only someone who has watched you closely for 20 years can manage. And she said 5 words. You don't build for yourself anymore. I think most people have someone in their life who has said something like that to them, something short and quiet that rearranged everything. She was right. In 8 years of running a custom furniture business, I had not built a single piece for myself. Not one. Every joint, every hour, every cut, all of it had been for clients, for money, for invoices. The thing I had originally loved, that private conversation between me and the wood. I hadn't just neglected it. I had given it away. Now, here is where I need to go deeper, because the obvious conclusion, don't turn your passion into a job, is too simple. And simple advice is exactly what got me into this situation in the first place. Plenty of people turn their passion into their livelihood, and it sustains them. It feeds them for decades. So the real question is not whether you should monetize your love. The question is, what separates the people who thrive from the people who hollow out? Because the outcome is clearly not the same for everyone. Something is different, something structural. I've had 40 years to think about this, and I've arrived at a distinction that I believe is more useful than do what you love ever was. Most people never separate them, and that is where the trouble begins. The first is love that takes. I call it consumptive love. This is the love of experience. You love how it feels to play music. You love the sensation of running a long distance. You love the smell of fresh cut wood and the way a dovetail clicks into place. Consumptive love is about what the activity gives you. You do the thing and it deposits a feeling into your account. The second is love that gives. I call it generative love. This is different in kind, not just degree. You love that the piece of music moved a stranger in the audience. You love that the table you built will hold a family's dinners for 30 years. You love that the skill you taught someone else will outlive you. Generative love is about what the activity creates beyond you. It is not a withdrawal. It is a contribution to something that keeps existing after the feeling fades. I remember a conversation that made this difference real for me. A man named David. He was a luthier, built guitars by hand. His shop was about 20 miles from mine. We ran into each other at a lumber supplier one morning, both picking through the same stack of maple. I asked him if he ever got tired of it. He looked at me like I'd asked him if he got tired of breathing. He said, I don't build guitars because I love building guitars. I build them because somewhere right now, a kid is playing one of mine and doesn't know my name, and that is exactly how it should be. He wasn't chasing the feeling, he was feeding something that lived outside of him. And I realized, standing there in that warehouse with sawdust in the air, that I had no version of that sentence. I couldn't point to anything beyond my own experience. The silence, the focus, the narrowing, all of it started and ended with me. Here is the difference that matters. Consumptive love is fragile. It depends entirely on your internal state. When the feeling fades, and it will, because feelings are designed to be temporary, the love fades with it. You've lost your engine. Generative love is structural. It doesn't require you to feel a certain way on a given Tuesday morning. It is anchored to something outside of you, a purpose, a function, a contribution that exists whether you're inspired or not. The feeling can come and go. The reason stays. When I ran my shop, I was operating almost entirely on consumptive love. I was chasing the silence. And when the market crushed that feeling out of the work, when the clients and deadlines and compromises bled it dry, I had nothing underneath to stand on, just a hollow space where the experience used to be. But even this distinction doesn't explain everything, because knowing which type of love you are, following still doesn't tell you. There is a third piece, and it is the one nobody wants to hear. Do what you love makes a category error. It treats love as a compass, something fixed, something that points reliably in the right direction year after year, and all you have to do is follow. But love is not a compass. Love is weather. It shifts, a season of warmth, sometimes a long winter that feels permanent. You don't navigate by weather. You endure it, you dress for it, but you don't use it to chart a course. What actually functions as a compass, and I didn't learn this until I had already lost years, I couldn't get back, is not love. It is tolerance. I know that word sounds wrong. Tolerance. It doesn't inspire anyone. It doesn't fit on a poster. Nobody stands at a podium and says, go find what you can tolerate. Every kind of work, every single kind, without exception, has a ratio. There are the moments you love, and there are the hours that are tedious, repetitive, administrative, frustrating, and thankless. In woodworking, the moments I loved, choosing the wood, fitting the joints, running my hand over a surface, sanded to 2000 grit, accounted for maybe 5% of my actual working time. The other 95% was sourcing lumber, writing estimates, managing expectations, sanding the same piece for the 4th time, fixing mistakes that shouldn't have happened, chasing late payments, and sweeping sawdust off a concrete floor at 9 o'clock at night. Do what you love. Focuses you on the 5%. It asks, what are your peak moments? Go build your life around those. But you don't live in the peaks, you live in the 95%. And if you can't tolerate the 95%, genuinely tolerate it without resentment, without the constant feeling that you are just enduring the bad parts. To get to the good parts, they're too rare, too brief. They can't carry the full weight of a career. So the better question, the one I wish someone had asked me at 23 instead of telling me to follow my passion, is not, what do you love? It is this, what are you willing to be bored by? What tedium can you carry without it breaking you? What frustration can you absorb on a grey Tuesday afternoon and still show up Wednesday? I wonder how many of you are sitting in that 95% right now, and whether you've been honest with yourself about whether you can carry it. I didn't have these words back then. I didn't have frameworks or distinctions. All I had was a body that was tired and a mind that knew something had to change. I closed the shop when I was 39, not with a grand realization. With exhaustion, I stood outside Jefferson Vocational for 10 minutes the first morning. Brick building, 1960s. Industrial. Nothing about it said dream. I almost got back in my car, but I went in. I took a job teaching woodworking. It paid less. The shop was half the size. The tools were dull. Half the students didn't want to be there. The other half weren't sure. Nobody told me I was living the dream. And something began to happen that I did not expect and did not plan for. The teaching was repetitive, the same joints, the same techniques, the same safety lectures, semester after semester, but it was generative. I wasn't building for myself anymore. I wasn't building for clients. I was placing a skill into someone else's hands. And watching a 16-year-old cut their first dovetail, crooked usually, with gaps you could see from across the room, but watching them hold it up and understand, for the first time, that they had just made something real with their own hands, that produced something I hadn't felt in years. Not the old silence, something different. That it would keep going after I left the room, and then, quietly with announcement, I started building again. After school, in the shop, after the last student left, small things. A cutting board for Eleanor, a step stool for the kitchen, a box with finger joints to hold her sewing things, things that existed only because I wanted them to, and the silence came back, not all at once, slowly, like hearing returning after you've been in a loud room for too long, and you step outside, and the world is suddenly startlingly quiet. The focus, the narrowing, the conversation between me and the wood that I thought I had destroyed, permanent. Third, test your tolerance before you test your passion. Don't ask what you love. Ask what you are willing to do when you don't love it, what tedium you can carry, what thankless afternoon you can absorb and still come back. The peaks are the brochure. The ordinary hours are the house. If you can't tolerate the house, I still build. Last month I finished a rocking chair for my granddaughter. White oak, hand-cut mortise, and tenon joints. No client, no deadline, no market. It took 3 weeks longer than it needed to. And the silence was there. The same silence I first found in my father's garage when I was 17 years old. Do what you love didn't lie to me, but it told me only half the truth. It told me the spark mattered. It never mentioned that a spark by itself is not enough. The structure you build around it, the identity you protect, the tolerance you cultivate, the purpose you anchor beyond the feeling, that determines whether the spark becomes something that warms you for 50 years or something that burns bright for a moment and leaves you sitting in the dark, wondering what happened. Nobody told me that at 23. If someone you know is building their life on advice they've never questioned, send them this.